This town isn't big enough for two.
7 out of 10 at best Fire Emblem games.
Oh, you're a...
7 out of 10 at best Fire Emblem game.
Alright, just not a super one.
Yeah? What's the difference?
Presentation!
Have you ever noticed that most cutscenes in Three Houses and Engage kind of look the same? You know, just a medium shot of a bunch of people standing around talking to each other about the currently transpiring events, using the same recycled mocap animations whenever they want to emphasize something, with it switching to a close-up if they want to focus on something a specific character is saying, without anything ever really happening in them, and if something does happen, it just cuts to black so they don't have to animate it. Don't you think it all gets, you know, a bit samey? Now, I do want to point out that I will be specifically talking about in-engine cutscenes in this video, rather than pre-rendered ones, as the pre-rendered cutscenes are usually quite well done, but they're few and far between in these 50-hour-long games. We are going to be looking at this most of the time. But a lot of you are probably wondering, why does this even matter? Who cares? Well, I'm going to go through a few examples to show you how good presentation and thinking about how you structure your scenes can make all the difference. Properly utilizing the camera in your scene is very important if you ever want to be some sort of director. It can help the viewer connect with the character, emphasize certain points, and much more. One of my favorite movies, The Thing, utilizes the camera expertly, and each scene is composed with extreme care. To go over one specific example, let's go over the ending of The Thing. Spoiler warning, by the way, go watch the movie if you haven't, it's really good. Anyway, the movie centers around an alien that can imitate people perfectly, so the characters never really know who's on their side, and solving the mystery of who the Thing is a big part of the movie. However, the movie ends with two characters, who could both be the Thing, having their final conversation together. At this point, the viewer could be thinking many things, like, is Childs the Thing? Is McCready the Thing? Are they both the Thing? Neither? Despite being a non-violent scene, it holds a certain amount of intensity as they question each other, and the viewer ponders this. However, before we get to see what happens next, the camera cuts to a bird's eye view of the base, so we don't get to see the outcome. It's eerie. The audience is left wondering what happens, but throughout the movie, the characters didn't know who the Thing was, so why should we? The camera is denying us this information, and helping us fuel our own paranoia, which the characters felt throughout the film. It's the perfect ending to the movie, and it wouldn't be possible without the thought put into the camera work. These principles also apply to video games. Let's take a look at one of my favorite video games, Majora's Mask, with examples like the camera doing a close-up on Link's face whenever he transforms to emphasize the disturbing nature of his transformations, and making sure we never get a clear view of the giant when Link learns the Oath to Order, to make the whole thing feel more mysterious and odd. Whoever was behind the shot composition of Majora's Mask did a great job of selling it as the eerie and surreal experience that it is. Since we've talked about a horror movie and a game that has a lot of disturbing elements, let's talk about one of the creepier elements of Three Houses. Lysithea as a child was subject to horrible experiments by a dark cult that permanently lowered her lifespan, as well as wiping out all of her siblings. So, how does she deliver this information to her comrades? The same way the game delivers everything else, with a close-up on Lysithea when she's saying her piece, before quickly cutting back to our beloved medium-shot friendship circle. God, Three Houses has the most intricate world building and deepest lore in this franchise, but it always delivers this information in the most boring and samey way possible. My favorite example of the lack of care put into how cutscenes are set up in the Switch Fire Emblem games is with this cutscene right here, where Alear was just sent to the pearly gates by a giant laser that also happens to have Ivy in the background. Here's how Ivy is supposed to feel about Alear, by the way.
Can we start with why you seem to have such anger toward me?
I love you.
Huh?
I love you.
Anyway, Alear's gone, and Vale's making fun of them, saying, "Oh, you're so doomed, ahaha!" And for some reason, this camera shot shows Ivy just standing in the background with a face that indicates that she's just feeling so neutral about all this. And if Ivy doesn't care that the love of her life is gone, then why should I? If you were skeptical before, hopefully you're starting to see how this sort of thing can really matter. Honestly, this whole scene with Alear being gone just reeks of a lack of creativity. I mean, look, we get Alear in the afterlife. That opens up a lot of opportunities. Maybe we'll get a cool perspective shot, maybe distort things a little to emphasize the weird space her and Vale are currently occupying. Nope. Wrong answer. We get none of that. It's just her and Vale talking with the same camera angles that we've been seeing for the rest of the game too. Whoop-de-doo. Wow, these Switch Fire Emblem games sure do have terrible visual presentation. Hopefully the character writing in one of them isn't so compelling that a lot of people still actively discuss them 5 years later, and I really hope it doesn't introduce me to a character that I've ever related the most to in fiction. Gee, that would suck. Oh no. So despite having incredibly uninspired scenes most of the time, other aspects of Three Houses' presentation kinda makes up for it, with things like incredible voice work that gets you extremely invested in the characters and world they inhabit. Even though having creative scenes could have enhanced all of these aspects tenfold, Three Houses somehow got people to care regardless. Engage, on the other hand, in my opinion anyway, keep that in mind, majorly struggles with getting me attached to its characters. Just to set the baseline for what I think a good character introduction in a game is, let's look at Halo 2's Gravemind. The scene starts with Master Chief being dragged, but you don't know what he's being dragged by, but we do get a partial view of it. Then, we're left looking at the reflection on his helmet for a few seconds. This is all to build suspense for the big reveal, then boom, we see the monstrosity that stands before us, and throughout the rest of the scene we cut to different grotesque parts of his body. But here's the thing, as soon as we see the full scale of this beast and assume something like, oh, so this is a big, mindless monster that we're gonna have to fight, this is a boss battle, the Master Chief's gonna have to beat this guy, it starts speaking in poetry.
This one is machine and nerve, and has its mind concluded. This one is but flesh and faith, and is the more deluded.
So the second we think we understand this thing and what it is, the beast completely flips the script, leaving us, the audience, and the characters confused about this mysterious being's full capabilities. A perfect introduction to the character that is the Gravemind. Now imagine if there was no build-up, and there was just a fade-in mid-shot, and that was just maintained for the rest of the scene. Not as interesting, is it? Back to Fire Emblem. For an extremely specific example, let's start off with the introductions of the last retainer duo you get that join you at the start of their respective chapters in 2 different Fire Emblem games. Panette and Marin are Tamara's retainers and join you at the start of the chapter, with Panette being a particularly interesting character if you read her supports. So, let's see how they're introduced.
I'll be performing my favorite song with my backup singers, Marin and Panette.
Ready.
As am I.
Yup, that's all you get. It's not a very strong introduction to their characters, is it? There's not really a lot to, get attached to. Nothing that really invites much interest. Now, let's look at the introduction of Xander's retainers in Conquest. Ryoma, a character that completely eclipses your strength at this point in the story, has you cornered. Your back's against the wall, when suddenly, wow! It's a scene that actually introduces you to these characters in a dynamic and exciting way. They're even fending off Ryoma, a character which I have said you don't even hold a candle to at this point in the story, which gets the player excited to use them. You know what they say, folks, you never get a second first impression, and a lot of characters in Engage don't leave much of an impression at all. A lot of the time the game just sort of tosses these guys at you without even bothering to introduce them in any significant way. This is a terrible aspect of presentation because the game is not presenting these characters to me. Fire Emblem is a series that highly relies on you getting attached to your little army of scrimblows, so you invest in their potential, and then get sad when they bite the dust. Engage is lacking in this aspect, to me, because the game can hide all of the deep Panette lore it wants in its supports. If the player isn't that invested in the character in the first place, it's hard to get them invested at all later. Keep in mind that this doesn't even necessarily have to be done through cutscenes either. Again, going back to Conquest, Shura is one of my favorite Fire Emblem characters, and he leaves a very strong first impression, considering that there's an entire chapter completely dedicated to breaking his butt before you can recruit him, while he's stealing the cash that you desperately need. In Three Houses, there's an entire section at the beginning of the game dedicated to getting the player and their class acquainted. The fact of the matter is, Engage characters failed to stick with most people. This is self-evident by the fact that no Engage characters won a spot in the first Choose Your Legends they were included in. Choose Your Legends is a yearly Fire Emblem Heroes popularity contest that determines 4 characters who will get a new costume that year, compared to Three Houses, which dominated the polls for many years. So while both of these games have pretty bad presentation, Engage suffers much more in this specific area. Now you might not think this based on what I just said, but this game does have interesting characters despite what some people would have you believe. The player is just hardly ever given the initial push to go explore them. Now for a question. How did older Fire Emblems avoid conundrums such as these? a lot of them didn't even exist in 3D space, and thus have no choice but to rely on shots where two sprites are facing each other, delivering their text. Well, for starters, the newer games are a lot longer. This cutscene video for Golden Deer that I pulled to make this video is 12 hours long. That, ladies and gents, is about 2 hours more than the time it typically takes me to complete a run of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. So, with these games taking a lot longer than they used to, with runs of 3 houses and Engage potentially taking up to 50 hours, there's a lot more time for things to get stale. More importantly though, the Switch games don't really utilize the assets that are already at their disposal. The older Fire Emblem games were much more eager to incorporate elements of the gameplay into the presentation of the story. For example, let's look at one of the most memorable moments in Binding Blade. Celica at this point in the story is portrayed as a pretty powerful figure of authority. She got Narcian to run away earlier and is defending this fort all by herself. However, when Zafeel fights her, he absolutely obliterates her. This is a great scene because 1, it immediately cements him as a credible threat, 2, it serves as a great reintroduction to the character since by this point in the story we haven't seen him in a while, and 3, it's the first time we've seen him fight, and his animations are really cool, so now we think that Zafeel is cool. Now, they didn't make a pre-rendered cutscene, or graphic for this scene, or fade to black, they just used Binding Blade's regular combat screen and used these characters' normal combat animations for when they fight. This, ladies and gentlemen, is called working smarter, not harder. The devs for this game know how to fully sell us on a scene using things they already had at their disposal. And you can see this used to great effect throughout the series. The introduction of Perry and Laszlo I showed earlier, in that scene they're just using their animations from when they fight in the regular gameplay, but because of how it's framed, it doesn't come across as lazy or anything, it's just awesome. For some reason though, the Switch-era Fire Emblem games are very, very afraid to do this. I mean, just look at the scene in 3 Houses where Rodrigue dies. Fletch is about to stab Dimitri, but instead of actually showing us that, it just awkwardly shifts to a 2D illustration where we can see Fletch's lovely expression here for a long, long time before Rodrigue makes the save. Splendid. The thing is though, 3 Houses already has the assets needed to make this scene regularly. Guard adjutants are a thing, so there's an animation they could just apply to Rodrigue where he jumps in front of Dimitri to save him. Then you could even have the, the little dramatic death fall over that all the characters do when they, die. So why didn't the developers do this? This odd reluctance to reuse assets from the gameplay sections of the game results in 2 games where all the cutscenes are nothing but characters standing around and talking for 12 hours. Riveting. And of course the sections where things do actually happen are laughably bad. Oh no guys, Ivy's getting away, hopefully she doesn't use her powers to fade to black so we can't see her mount her wyvern. Aw dang it, there she goes. I really hope they go back on the decision to stop using gameplay assets in the next Fire Emblem game, because as shown in this section, that decision has made the presentation of these games noticeably worse. And even then, that's just the working smarter, not harder way of doing things. There is the actual, working harder method too. In Revelation, there's a whole scene where a bunch of characters jump off a bridge, which I think I don't need to tell you, but the characters never jump off bridges in normal gameplay. Then later in the scene, Scarlet's flower is destroyed and there's an actual animation for it. And 3 Houses are engaged, this would have been a framed PNG with the text implying that it was destroyed. And the bar is in hell if I'm praising Fire Emblem Revelation over any other piece of media. Honestly, I just don't know why the Switch-era games are so lacking in this department, since they almost definitely had higher budgets than the 3DS games, which had plenty of unique scenes and animations. It's a genuine mystery to me. Folks, I have a question for you that you can answer in the comments if you want. Do you have a favorite scene in 3 Houses Are Engaged that's not from a pre-rendered cutscene? To be honest, I don't really think I do. Because, as I stated previously, they all come across as very samey to me. You can definitely appreciate the scene for other aspects, like the aforementioned wonderful voice work the cast provides, but the voice work is excellent in every scene in these games, so none of them really stand out to me that much. To be completely honest though, there is one scene that sticks out to me, and it comes in one of the final scenes of Engage. Sombron is dying, and Alear gives them the chance to see Zero Emblem one last time, an emblem that we don't even know the identity of. After Alear convinces Sombron to say the invocation one last time, we cut to a perspective shot for Sombron as a white tint surrounds the edges of the camera. After that, he dies in peace after he thinks he's seen Zero Emblem. This gets the audience thinking. Was Alear the Zero Emblem? Was it Vale? Is it something that we can't even see? Or was the white tint surrounding the edges of the camera supposed to indicate that these were just the hopes of a man that was just about to die, and that he really didn't even see anything at all? It's interesting. It kind of reminds me of the ending of The Thing with how many questions it raises. To be frank with you though, this scene is nothing but disappointing to me, because it means that the developers were capable of doing interesting things with their scenes the entire time, but they didn't. So that's my retrospective on the Switch era of Fire Emblem, and how it failed. I really do hope that the next game in the series has a better presentation, because I really don't want to look at dry nothingness for 12 hours again. I also do want to say, even though I make negative videos on this series from time to time, I really do love it. I wouldn't have a whole YouTube channel dedicated to it if I didn't love it. I wouldn't be making my own SRPG right now if I wasn't inspired by Fire Emblem. I just think it's important to critique the things you like sometimes, because if 3 houses left this big of an impact on people, imagine what they could do in the next Fire Emblem if they just stepped it up the slightest bit, the tiniest bit, which they can obviously do based on the ending of Engage. What do you think though? Am I being overly critical? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Also, I'd like to give a special thanks to my patrons Ginger and Julia for supporting the channel. Most importantly though, remember to have a nice day. Bye bye!